contribution in the development of Franz thought dominated most Shang Yang studies. This unproductive historical and scholarly hostility toward Shang Yang left his political philosophy a rich and explored ground for research. Through this thesis, I aim to underscore Shang Yang's political philosophy beyond the censorship and partiality affixed to his historical character. Thus, although it may appear in the discussion that I am rehabilitating Shang Yang as a person, it is however difficult to disassociate the person from his philosophy. I am therefore vying for a fairer reading of Shang Yang's philosophy with the hope of vindicating his notion of fun. Thus, against the backdrop of the inadequacy of the current way of reading Shang Yang, the intention of this research was to offer an alternative reading of the Book of Lord Shang's philosophy. Statement of the PowerPoint. I sought to explore Shang Yang's thought and its importance in ancient Chinese scholarship. The reevaluation of Shang Yang's political philosophy of thought does not only vindicate his contribution or find his enduring significance, but may also serve as a lamppost to shed light on contemporary politics. Against this background, I proceed with this study guided by the question: is there enough warrant in Shang Yang's notion of thought to vindicate his philosophy against a long history of contentious reading? In the course of discussing the main problem, I attempted to answer the following sub-questions. First, what is the origin of Fa? Second, what is the significance and distinct aspect of Shang Yang's notion of Fa? And lastly, what is the impact of Shang Yang's notion of Fa on ancient Chinese politics in general and the Chinese political philosophy in particular? Review of related literature. In this research, I revisited available literatures which highlight Shang Yang's philosophic legacy, beginning from the pronounced neglect and misconceptions on Shang Yang's studies to the restoration of his proper place in Chinese philosophical scholarship. The survey consisted of two themes. First, the critical depiction of Confucianism and repudiation of Fazia philosophy. Second, the neglect and revival efforts on Shang Yang's thought. The first aspect portrayed the scholar's proclivity to dismiss and censor Fazia. In particular, Shang Yang was greatly influenced by the antagonistic reception it garnered as a leading anti-Confucian thinker. The common branding Fazia had received includes its perverse intention of enforcing cold-blooded laws and overly romanticized antagonism of Shang Yang's historical life, which lasted for 2 millennia. Furthermore, as a consequence of its austere refutation of Rutia, virtue politics, Fazia often suffered from uncritical analysis and generally presented as a complete contradiction of Rutia's non-coercive philosophy. In addition, most scholars' aforementioned fixation on Han-Feizhi foster the prevailing partiality and intentional neglect of other Fa thinkers. The failed revival efforts, misconceptions, and inconsistent interpretations repel scholars to explore the fertile grounds of Fazia thought. Research design. The culmination of the primary objective consequentially aimed to recover Shang Yang's place in the study of ancient Chinese philosophizing and the relevance of his contribution in the contemporary political theory. In doing so, this study consisted of 3 chapters employing archival and exegetical approaches and engaging with 2 English translations of the Shang Shu, the 1928 Book of Lord Shang by J.J.L. Duvenda, and 2017 The Apologetics of State Power, the Book of Lord Shang by Yuri Pines. The second chapter highlighted the historical reception and mainstream ways of reading Fazia philosophy aimed at mapping out the place of Shang Yang in the existing literature. The third chapter focused on Shang Yang's Fa and its operative, organic, and lasting impact across ages. The fourth chapter underscored the enduring legacy of Shang Yang's philosophy of Fa in the succeeding dynasties and in the contemporary times. Lastly, the fifth chapter addressed Shang Yang's significant contributions and its legitimacy centered on the notion of Fa. Chapter 2, Historical and Contemporary Reading of Fazia Philosophy. In the course of the second chapter, I went over the historical and contemporary readings of Fazia philosophy to emphasize a variety of its scholarly receptions, specifically Shang Yang's repudiation of the Zhou virtue politics, his brand of Fa, and the enduring relevance of his philosophy in the study of political theory. I argued that Fazia and Shang Yang's thought in particular had suffered from severe misreading. Moreover, I asserted that the periodic revival efforts and recognition of the underrated influence of Fazia thought was not enough to counter the dominant unwarranted claims. The lack of in-depth analysis of Shang Yang's text contributed as well to the spread and legitimization of such questionable reading. Fazia's repudiation of the Zhou ideal government. The Zhou ideal society. I proceeded by revisiting Confucian virtue politics in order to understand the historical, ontological, and social-political tradition of Zhou, which Shang Yang and the rest of Fazia thinkers had strongly criticized. I founded on the notion of harmony, or the Zhou onto-ethical tradition guided the ancient Chinese life world, which was preserved by the literati. The Confucian society upheld the rule of virtue, or Zhi, that culminated in a benevolent government, or Rencheng. The epitome of the Confucian vision aspired for the harmony of all benevolent nations in all under heaven, flourish in the grand unity of a commonwealth of nation, or Tianxia Tato. The disparity of the ideal and the real. However, the noble proposals of the Confucians were undermined by the relentless interstate conflicts, the fragmented elite, and the impoverished life of the populace. The wide disparity between the ideal and the real state of affairs led Fa thinkers to distrust any moral political discourse. The brand of Chinese legalism. Fazia philosophy, as proponents of the school of law, or known as Fazia, they focused on the establishment of a system of practical, realistic politics. They were also known for their repudiation of the tradition of antiquity. They argued that virtue politics was inefficient in a society composed of morally crooked people. Hence, instead of relying on righteousness and propriety, Fazia advocates insisted on the employment of the principles of law, or Fa, method, Shu, and power, Shu. The CG had strongly influenced the conventional reception attached to Fazia political philosophy. Citing Sima Qian, he writes, "The legalist school is stern and lacks compassion. However, its rectification, its insistence on the differentiation between the superior and the subordinate should all be upheld without change. The legalist school does not discriminate on the basis of closeness of personal relationship or status of noble lineage, but makes decision based on uniform laws. Thus, the sentiments on kinship and respect are eradicated. Such a way of conducting affairs can only be temporary expediency but cannot succeed in long term. Therefore, it is said that this school is stern and lacks compassion. Yet, its insistence on the principle of the elevation of the ruler and demotion of the minister and its enforcement of the rule of clear divisions and of duties of official positions must not be changed despite the clamor of the 100 schools. Their counsel, in other words, was exclusive of any virtuous moral cultivation and armchair teachings on righteousness. Questions have been raised, however, concerning the proper way of looking at the core principles of Fazia thought, namely the principles of Fa, Shu, and Shi. Some sources conveniently acknowledge the association of the three concepts as the summation of the overarching principles of Fazia politics. Wing Chit-chan, for instance, simply assigned law as the contribution of Shang Yang, while Shen Puhai advocated method and Shen Tao emphasized power. This oversimplification plausibly emerges from the problem of translating the concepts according to the nearest English term. As a consequence of the translation confusion, it was only recently that contemporary sinologists, namely A.C. Graham, Benjamin Schwartz, Roger Ames, Chad Hansen, Chen Yuan-Fu, and Paul Golden, to name a few, attempted to investigate the accuracy and appropriateness of these doctrines with the text affixed to their name. Unproductive fixation on Han Fei. Other than the goal of clearing the unjustified doctrines of Fazia, the available literature appears to show partiality to a singular Fa thinker, Han Fei. For a long time, scholars celebrated Han Fei's significant contribution as a synthesizer of all three Fazi doctrines, which results to lesser debates or espousing of new interpretations and to the neglect of other Fa thinkers. Most studies show great interest in Han Fei's supposed sophisticated synthesis of his predecessors' ideas, which is said to be presented in a more structured, urbane, well-argued, witty, and coherent fashion. Arabella Lyon, however, explains that aside from the accessibility of the Book of Han Fei translations, his philosophy seemed to be more palatable and have close affinities with Western philosophies. The enduring relevance of Shang Yang in the study of political theory. In spite of the long history of censorship, Shang Yang's polemics maintained its significance in the Chinese intellectual narrative. His philosophy of governance, law, and strict use of rewards and punishments, which associate to Chinese legalism, are valuable principles in the study of contemporary political theory. Chad Hansen, for instance, points a comparable thrust advocated by liberalism and positivist legal theory on Faja political strategy. Shang Yang's thought garnered interest among scholars, most especially its parallelism with the thoughts of Western Renaissance and modern political theories, Machiavelli, Hobbes, and Rousseau. Although there are affinities in their schemes, the aforementioned Western thinkers, however, pale in comparison on the basis of the political praxis of Shang Yang, whereas recent studies have warranted his philosophy qualified as method of today's political realism. Scholars perceive Shang Yang's Fa an effective heuristic that promises positive success rates in administering the state, as it encourages cooperation, fairness, and prioritizes public welfare. Inadequacy of today's reading of Faja philosophy. Thus, what the second chapter pushed forth is the contention that historical and contemporary scholarship dedicated to Faja philosophy, in spite of their periodical revival, had been generally dominated by unwarranted claims. The aforementioned discussion presented the mainstream readings which are arguably questionable and inadequately derived from obscure texts and outdated artifacts. The challenge that confronts us today in today's study of Faja philosophy, specifically that of Shang Yang, is the scholarly disenchantment from a long history of persistent misappropriation and contentious reading. Chapter 3, Shang Yang's Fa as a key element of reform. With the attempt to rectify the misreading of Shang Yang's philosophy, I examined the third chapter, the operative, organic, and enduring legacy of the principle of Fa. The discussion addressed three crucial themes, namely the significance of Fa from its original conception, the Book of Lord Shang's conceptualization of Fa, and the tenets of Shang Yang's socio-political engineering of the state of Qin. Shang Yang's politics promoted the centralization of state power through a total control of administrative, socio-economic, and military reforms to enrich and empower the government. Through his political campaign, he shifted the socio-political landscape of ancient China from a decentralized rule of virtue to a strong centralized government ruled by Fa. The contention of this chapter is grounded on the basic presupposition of Fa, translated in the English language as law. Prior to warring states' period's usage of the term Fa, the ancient dynasties used Sing to refer to punishments. Eventually, the technical term Fa first appeared among the Hundred Schools texts, such as in the Analects, Tao Te Ching, and the Book of Mozi. From these accounts, many sinologists agree on and push forth the misleading and unwarranted oversimplification of the term Fa as law that is conventionally affixed to Fazia. Shada Hansen points out how the Chinese language tends to evolve and to have more than one exact meaning. Moreover, this study also adheres to the contention that Fa contains a wide semantic range. Hence, this study does not disregard the translation law for Fa. It simply aims to do away with the uncritical assumption of the principal law as the appropriate or exact significance of Fa. In this attempt to reread the Book of Lord Shang, I argue that Fa is a novel proposal that changed the political and philosophical landscape of ancient China. As I proceed, I will show that the essence of the original concept or prototype of Fa of the early times may be distinguished from Shang Yang. The origin of the term Fa. Shang Yang's government of Fa advocated the use of objective measurement-like standards aimed at the replacement of the corrupted Zhou reliance on aristocratic private judgment In the first part of the chapter, I traced the seminal thought of Fa and argued that it was only during the 4th century BC Warring States period that Fa had become a technical vocabulary, hence was noted in this research as a prototype of Fa. The distinction of Shang Yang's philosophy is subdued on the notion of Si and Ho. The former literally stands for private, whereas the latter means public. Paul R. Goldin explains that the two are mutually antagonistic principles. The Book of Lord Shang condemns the aristocracy and men of talent as the fountainhead of Si. Shang Yang maintains that whenever Si is pursued by men, society eventually falls into disorder. However, order is restored when sages intervene with measures that uphold law. In addition to that, I also clarified that the technical term Fa, signifying punitive law, evolved from Sing or punishment, which itself originated from Bing, which stands for military or warlike. Thus, prior to Chou's usage of the term Fa, ancient China's primitive war-torn society already adhered to Sing to justify the alleged inherent brutal and harsh attributes of the attached to Fa. This standpoint echoed Shang Yang's staunch criticism against the debased virtue politics of the warring states and the persistent arrogation of the authority of the rulers who pretend to embody a private wisdom. This culture has been perpetuated ever since by rulers and ministers who possess the power to inflict Fa. The literati themselves acknowledge the nobility's use of punishment as an aid to lead. In other words, codified punitive laws had been subservient to the will of the rulers since the genesis of the Chinese civilization. Shang Yang's philosophy of Fa. Departing from the prototype notion of penal law as a private instrument of the ruling elite, Shang Yang reformed Fa by reinforcing uniformity and objectivity applied to all. Shang Yang's political philosophy centered on the establishment of standard as the ultimate principle, which would secure peace for all under heaven. Moreover, the Book of Lord Shang's Fa possessed a large semantic range taking a standard of authority, system of governance, and model of human conduct. Shang Yang propounded Fa as an established standard to govern all state of affairs, and this, I argued in the second chapter, was Shang Yang's indispensable philosophical contribution to the Chinese intellectual tradition. Reconstruction of the semantic meanings of Shang Yang's Fa. The succeeding discussions stressed Shang Yang's reformation of the state of Qin as the pivot of his political philosophy. In order to do so, I presented a reconstruction of the notion of Fa in its 3 dimensions, namely Fa as standard of authority, as method of governance, and as a model of human conduct. Interwoven in the very fabric of his reforms were the Book of Lord Shang's proposals for the creation of new laws, mutual surveillance, and agricultural and military reforms. The first dimension, Fa as standard of authority, was implied in the Book of Lord Shang's radical contention that social standards may be altered when necessary according to the needs of the time. Shang Yang pushed his novel proposal of adapting with the needs of the times and pressed for the necessity of changing the norms according to immediate circumstances. He insisted the creation of new laws or new Fa to repair the outdated norms and laws. He proposed the social standards may be altered when necessary according to the needs of the time. He deemed that the true monarch's active role as a creator of Fa is a criteria that separates the sages from ordinary rulers who merely maintain and follow conventions. The second dimension, Fa as a model of human conduct, was inclusive of the order to reform Qin's socio-political standard. Shang Yang's succeeding polemic targeted the reorganization of the family and introduced the 5-10 household group, or Wushu, regulated by mutual surveillance, or Liangchuo. The Book of Lord Shang stressed that the people, or he called Min, were innately selfish and essentially motivated by fame and profit. Herein lies Shang Yang's grasp of human psychology that is intrinsically stimulated by the sways of likes and dislikes. He also refuted the natural union of the family and the state. He said that the state was but an arbitrary vehicle organized to hinder the natural war of man against man. Introducing a new Qin superstructure, the scheme of mutual surveillance would ideally and practically allow monitoring of subjects more effectively. At the core of this agenda was the objective to fortify state regulations. A strong state relies on the judgment of families who value cooperation to deter crimes and private feuds. The mechanistic uniform regulations, paired with the handles of rewards and punishments, planted in the consciousness of every subject that which is expected of them, their responsibility and accountability for each other. The third principle of FA was the establishment of a method of administration or governance. To ensure that all state of affairs were dealt with objectivity and all transactions were transparently registered by the state, in order to do so, Shang Yang instituted an objective system of administration focused on economics and military. Thus, the state must consolidate its bureaucracy through FA such that every grain and effort of the household was measured, taxed, and rewarded accordingly. Every household was given the opportunity to possess land and enjoy their harvest. Likewise, those who were dependent and lazy were heavily penalized and demoted. Shang Yang implemented a meritocracy in determining individual worth gauged through military victory. His political schemes encouraged the people to become diligent dealers and valiant soldiers of the state and provided opportunities to advance in wealth and rank. A comprehensive political system of FA. In spite of its perceived totalitarian facade, the preceding rereading of the organic and operational treatise of Shang Yang clarified the alleged autocratic scheme derived from the distinction of an absolute rule of punitive laws from a condition ruled by FA. In this state, every affair and conduct is regulated and adheres to the norms directed by the state, where no one dares to commit depravity nor tolerate abuse. I demonstrated that the principle of FA was far more complex than the mere implementation of strict laws. It envisioned to secure social cohesion through the aegis of FA. Hence, despite of the perceived immorality, if not amorality, of Shang Yang's method, his renewal of the Qin superstructure fundamentally advocated a society with a genuine regard for Kong. The Book of Lord Shang's vision states, and I quote, "Indeed, if people control each other by law and recommended each other by following systematic rules, they cannot benefit each other with praise nor harm each other with slander. If the people see that there is no benefit in praising each other, they will become used to loving each other without flattery. And if they see that there is no harm in slandering each other, they will become used to hating each other without injuring each other. If the love of men does not mean flattery, and the hatred of men does not mean causing injury, then both love and hatred will be pure, which is the highest degree of order. Therefore do I say, if one relies on law, the country will enjoy order." Hence, through the existence of FA, the people's proper actions and affairs were regulated and concretely defined. As I argued in this study, the comprehensive political philosophy of FA did not only involve regulation and governance, it also institutionalized the coincidence of virtue and law into the social-political norms and standard. Everyone was equal before FA. Shang Yang's politics envisioned an orderly rule of all under heaven where the values of right and wrong, common good, and self-regulation flourished in accordance to FA. Chapter 4, the enduring legacy of Shang Yang's reformative political philosophy. Lastly, the fourth chapter of this study featured the imperial and contemporary scholarly efforts to rehabilitate the philosophy of Lord Shang. It was claimed that despite the previous antagonism, the spirit of Shang Yang's FA, as most historical records suggest, was preserved for 2 millennia. Scholars, however, warned of the danger of crediting Shang Yang wholesale for the reforms that occurred from his reign as Prime Minister onwards. Definitely, the institution of FA in governance, jurisprudence, economy, and military had its consequences in the succeeding generations. The impact of FA in the post-Zhou dynasty era. Some studies suggested that the method of governance of Fatia was utilized not only by Han but also by the succeeding dynastic rules in spite of the Confucian suppression of Fatia philosophy. They maintained that the legalistic methods of Fatia sustained their influence on Chinese politics once interwoven with some Confucian traditions. In a promising study authored by Li Kunshan, entitled The Book of Lord Shang and the Elevation of Confucianism in Han, Li proposes the strong possibility that the early scholar Lu Jia encountered in his scholarship the 7th chapter opening the block of the Book of Lord Shang, and utilized it to convince Emperor Cao Tzu to restore the Confucian rule. If this assumption could be validated, Lee argues that Lu Jia adopted Shang Yang's philosophy of adapting with the times, anchored in his progressive view of history, by persuading King Cao Tzu to turn back to the methods of Qin and rule according to the Confucian benevolent government. The revival of Shang Yang in the modern period. Thousands of years later, Shang Yang's thought was revived in another episode of social unrest and revolution in China. In the modern times, Mao Zedong's early writings qualified himself as a distant amplifier of Shang Yang's call for political reform. Mao condemned China's intentional neglect of their indebtedness to Shang Yang's contribution and blamed it for the decadence of their society. Thus, in the open up and reform era of China, Mao called for a restoration of Shang Yang's philosophy to anchor communism by introducing the ideology of evaluating legalism and criticizing Confucianism, or Ping Fa Ibu. This social agenda encouraged another resurgence of Fazi thought, as reflected by the hike of scholarships and publications about Shang Yang in the 1970s. The socio-political government reforms that gave birth to modern China was a fulfillment of Shang Yang's vision of a total state and an authentic shift of power to the people. Conclusion and recommendation. At the core of these theses lies two objectives. First, the recovery of the reputation and philosophy of Shang Yang from intentional neglect and uncritical reception by succeeding thinkers within the ancient Chinese intellectual tradition. And second, to justify the significance of the notion of Fa against a long history of contentious reading, so as to restore Shang Yang's rightful place in the landscape of Chinese political philosophy. This thesis therefore highlighted the need for examination of Shang Yang's political philosophy by raising the issue of accuracy of translation or interpretation, aside from the centuries-long censorship of the Book of Lord Shang and the biased analysis of both the adherents and critics of Fazi writings. The problem of consistency of interpretation contributed to its weak scholarly reception. By marrying the sinological methods of translation paradigm and hermeneutics in analyzing the principle of Fa, I attempted to address this problem and to respond to what contemporary scholars identified as persistent misconceptions in the study of Fazi philosophy. This thesis has presented the overarching philosophy of the Book of Lord Shang, which culminated in the unique notion of Fa as standard. I contend that Shang Yang invested a new meaning on Fa against its conventional translation as law. Recent literature had been arguing that Shang Yang's Fa indeed included in its semantic extension the term law. While this claim is true to some extent, I believe, however, that it should neither be equated nor literally reduced to primitive laws, as commonly interpreted by most early scholars. To repair this misconception, I tried to demonstrate in this thesis an explicit connection between the semantic extension of Fa and an in-depth textual analysis of the Book of Lord Shang. It is here where I made an attempt to map out Shang Yang's comprehensive vision of orderly government of Fazi. Through this effort, I was able to underscore the origin, the significance, and indispensable contribution of Shang Yang. I contend that Shang Yang's political philosophy of Fa signaled the coincidence of the ethical and the legal life, which then secured a new socio-political order in all under heaven. Most specifically, I argued that the legitimacy of Shang Yang's political philosophy lies in its ability to institute actual reforms, that is, political praxis. At the core of Shang Yang's philosophy of Fa is realpolitik. As pointed out by Shang Yang to Du Xiao, the authenticity of Fa lies in its practicality, supported by Ko's claim that there exists in the ideas of Shang Yang a crossover from the philosophical realm to the boundaries of political science. Thus, it could be said that even the efforts of this research to revisit and acknowledge the Lord of Shang pale in comparison with the testimony of his reforms when one reckons his impact and significance as a political thinker. It can be said, therefore, that his legacy is fundamentally contingent upon political praxis at the level both of the citizens and the state, which in effect is at the core of his political philosophy. Recommendations. I conclude this study with an identification of 3 areas of research which can be undertaken in the future for the advancement of Fazi philosophy. First is the re-evaluation of other prominent thinkers associated with Fazia, namely Shen Puhai and Shen Tao, More specifically, the coherence of the conventional interpretation of the principles of Shu and Shi vis-a-vis the published treatises attributed to them. As a second option, future researchers may also consider doing an in-depth analysis of Han Fei's claims, considering his syntheses of Shang Yang's Fa, Shen Puhai Shu, and Shen Tao Shi. This study is important in order to validate the credibility of Han Fei, who is often touted as the great synthesizer of Fa. Lastly, the third recommendation concerns the proto-legalists of Fa thinkers. An examination of the thoughts of Huan Si, Chu Shan, and Li Kui, to name a few, will contribute to the development of a comprehensive understanding of Fa's way of philosophizing, specifically in the area of political theory.
So we give time for questions from the panel. We'll start? Okay. So, first, Nina, I congratulate you for a very original thesis, okay, and supported by Chinese characters and resources. First, my question with regards to the resources. You cited several dissertations. Okay? So I'd like to ask, where are these dissertations? Did you get them by through the internet, online, or?
I got them from Prof online.
Online. So I think it's better to give the access time. My first question has to do with the distinction of rule by law and rule of law. That's my first question.
Okay. So it's from, I think, this idea was from Wu Baoping and Li Gunshan's article, and the rule of law is the common assumption or the associated to the notion of, or the philosophy of Fatia, wherein it is always the being subservient, the people being subservient, a totalitarian state, using this cold-blooded, harsh laws, which I intend to clarify, which I tried to clarify in the book of Lord Chang or in my thesis. So a rule of law, basically, this is the antagonistic, or that's the biased perception that law is used as a method to as a totalitarian means to wherein the people will be subservient to these harsh laws or codified laws. However, when we say rule by law, I'm talking about here from the perspective of Shang Yang, wherein it's a measure, it's a gauge. When I try to clarify it as standard, I try to omit the idea of the concept of silk, wherein the tendency is when we use fa is from the perspective of, since it's a reaction from the Chou ideals, Chou concept of Li, which is held by the literati, by the ministers, by the rulers. Law is, or fa, is subservient to them, to use it to punish people, or to those who will commit crimes and depravity. On the contrary, when we say rule by fa or rule by law, from the perspective, I also don't want to use the term law, rule by fa, is to make it as the standard, as a means, as a measurement to guarantee that everything will be regulated. So instead of becoming a means to oppress, it is now ruled by fa or ruled by law. There is this standard in all state of affairs, not only limited to punitive laws or punishments, but in the economics, in the military even. So, as I've said, Shang Yang tried to construct this new socio-political standard, wherein it's not about using fa or law or punishment from the original term sing, to penalize people, to oppress them, rather to make it as a means to control, to regulate, that even rulers will be limited from this notion of standard, so that they will not abuse power as well, which is the very reason why there is the decadence, there is the corruption of the latter part of the Shang dynasty.
That's right. So my follow-up question will have to be the meaning of Fa now as standard. So your contention is that in Shang Yang, the meaning of Fa is not really law in the sense of penal law, but in the sense of a standard, an objective standard for governance, okay, that is adjusted to the need of the times, okay, as well as a model of conduct, okay, and a method of administration. Okay. So my follow-up question will be, who makes this standard?
Who makes the standard? For, again, situated on the condition of, this is the very reason why the thesis has to really reconstruct. We really did a kind of reconstruction because Dr. Cariño, my advisor, we don't want it to be a historical reiteration of the events. But then again, as I've mentioned, it's really difficult to deassociate Lord Shang Yang from the actual reform, since that's the very essence of his political philosophy, being an effectual political philosophy, not only in the ideal or speculative sense, but being able to use it to employ reforms. So with that, who will be the one who's going to create these laws from that specific timeline, or even, let's say, at the very moment, it's any ruler can create laws. That's the idea, that prior to the Zhou dynasty's perception that it's the Tianzi who is or the Junzi rather, who will determine based from primogeniture, based from the lineage. This time, Shang Yang acknowledged the reality that rulers are not coming from the voice of heaven, or rather, anyone. He accepted that in this very corrupted society, in this real state of things, any ruler who's able to, through the use of Fa, can create laws and can administer his own government, as long as he's knowledgeable of the condition of the time. So even an inept ruler, a mediocre ruler even, he calls them, can make sure that a government can succeed, can reign through the use of standard.
Yes, but I think you mentioned the true monarch.
Yes.
And so the true monarch is contrasted with the Junzi of Confucianism, where the Junzi belongs actually to the nobles, to the elite, so the Mandarin class, so to say. So my next question there is, how would you reconcile the Facia and the Rucia? Because your conclusion towards the end was that in the case of Shang Yang, he was able to merge the ethical and the legal, so to say. So when you say ethical, what predominates the morality of China is really the Confucianism. So if you were to make a synthesis of, because it appears that Shang Yang has always been interpreted as against the Rucia, right? So how would you reconcile the two perspectives of governance, the Rucia and the Facia?
First po, if coming from the standpoint of Shang Yang or the Book of Lord Shang, well, he definitely refuted the idea of Confucianism, all the traditions. That's why he wants to create new laws or new laws, to create a new social-political standard. To clarify the notion of the coalescence, the coincidence of ethical and the legal life, the Book of Lord Shang talks about what is good, what is virtue. In English translation, I'm not really that good or familiar with the Chinese, with the traditional language, but referring to the English translations, what these translators use, namely Levendak and Euripines, is the terms virtue, good, ethical, but they are not really referring to the perspective of the moral standpoint of Confucianism. So what I intend to say there is that the ethical, meaning what is right. Let me go back to this lengthy citation. So this one is somehow encapsulates the idea of what is good or virtuous or righteous for Shang Yang. Not necessarily because you are recognizing the Tarin or the Mandarin and the Shaolin or the small man, but because there is a genuine regard for the common good, which is the very root of the idea of Fa, to prioritize the public first, the common versus the private or the si, because si or private is the reason why there is harm, there is corruption in society. So that's the essence of what I wish to show in this thesis. So that's coming from Shang Yang. But how do I marry Confucianism with legalism? Well, this has been allegedly presented by scholars when I researched for Han influence. So after Qin Dynasty, so there is this speculation among scholars that Han tried to include as well. They didn't totally abolish the measures, the methods of legalism, but they still used it. So in some commentaries, they would say it's the facade of Confucianism, but the means and the methods are still legalism. So I think that's why Fa or law is always referred to or associated to Shang Yang, because the very idea of punishment or law is the one that is retained, but then the virtuous idea, the teachings are still Confucian facades. But the way they use laws or punishments is coming from the legalist teachings. Yes.
Hey, my final question is, you mentioned, and I've read also that the philosophy of Shang Yang was adopted by Mao Zedong. Do you think Mao Zedong interpreted Shang Yang in the way you are interpreting it now?
The citation that I cited in the first part of in my introduction, how Mao tried to lament to the condition of the modern China, was actually part of the earliest writings. So we can speculate that Mao is still quite young during this, when he tried to echo the ideas of the Lord of Shang. So perhaps he still possessed that misappropriation of the notion of legalism as laws, because the presumption is there is always this fear, from Su Tongpo's description of Shang Yang, when Shang Yang when one talks about Shang Yang, it becomes the mouth. So it parang Shang Yang equates fear, destruction of the family. So I think in order to influence the people to adhere to it, to Mao's radical ideas, because Shang Yang was also, his philosophy were of course seen as a radical philosophy versus this long tradition of virtuous society. So I think he still possessed the old or long tradition, long history of misconception, since it's only at this generation that scholars are trying to excavate or try to connect or clarify the old, the excavated materials versus the actual archaeological artifacts. So I think he's still holding the idea of the past in biased perspective.
Hello, Jenina.
I
There are several questions which I want to be clarified. First is, during Shang Yang's time, how do we know that the leader that they have chosen to initiate the Fa actually imbibes the philosophy of Fa?
Interestingly, actually, when Shang Yang was, this is from the historical account of the siege of Sumatin, Shang Yang's thought, when he applied to, because he's not an original of Qin, but he's from the state of Wei. So when his superior po was deceased, so he need to go to Qin because he's of course looking for another to become a minister. So he was employed. But prior to his employment, Shang Yang tried to propose first the virtuous teachings, but then the Duke Shao of Qin he fell asleep while listening to these virtuous teachings. So after the third session, after their third meeting, he presented the rule of the way of the conqueror, or which is this idea of changing the laws, having this new ways, harsh punishments, and all the conquering states. That's why the idea of Wangzi is to unify the states through war. There's no other way to unify the states but in their condition, but through war alone. So when it's his third time to meet Duke Shao, he presented this, the way of the conqueror, and Duke Shao, without realizing, was for hours he's listening to Shang Yang. So it's as if the first time he met Shang Yang, Shang Yang was offering the way of the virtues. He's offering Confucianism to guide him in order to make sure to guarantee the success of Qin. But then it's as if Duke Shao already has this presumption that he doesn't want to apply or to follow the ways of the virtuous. Rather, he is already looking for someone who can manifest the change, who can manifest these reforms, and he found it in the person of Shang Yang. So it's not really his intention originally to create this system, but it was through the support of his of the ruler Duke Shao that supported further the plan of creating a political system grounded on of change.
Yeah, but how do we know that this is really an embodiment of Fa? For example, in Shang Yang, how do we know that Shang Yang possess or at least understand the real meaning of Fa?
Can you clarify?
My point here is, are there standards wherein Shang Yang must follow in order to at least initiate the real Fa? Or if the Fa, Shang Yang's Fa is the model on how to at least initiate reform, are there standards we're going to follow in order to at least say that this is the Fa of Shang?
Actually, thank you Doc for that clarification. Fa is is a standard that is not the be-all, end-all fact. Unlike, for example, in Confucianism, this is always the perspective, always in comparison. So contrary to Confucianism, wherein Rin is a constant virtue, Fa is standard, but is not constant. That's what, meaning to, because he has this philosophy of adapting with the times.
But it is objective.
Yes, sir. It's objective in that condition, limited to that condition. That's why he's saying that we shouldn't proceed with or hold on to these outdated traditions because it's no longer appropriate for the times. In the condition of war, in the condition where people are crooked and lazy or following their own ways, that's why corruption arises. And so he says that maybe the rule of law is, or the rule of virtue was once effective during the times of the sages, but then again, in this very specific condition, their ideals may be great, or the idea of a perfect, how to govern society virtuously, but then the people are not, the condition and the people are not that virtuous compared to the older generation. That's why there is a need to establish a new standard of government based from how society works at the present condition.
Okay, follow up. So this standard, at least from the point of view of fall under the ambit of what you mentioned in your thesis, all under heaven.
All under heaven is what Tianxia, it's what they call the entire kingdom, the Middle Kingdom. So they have this conception that the world is China before. And so in the, going back again to the before the warring states, it worked. The system of feudalism worked. But then again, during the warring states period, the divide of the feudal lands caused them to consider the king, the Chunzi, a nominal position. And so, regardless of how the Confucians are trying to imbibe, to teach these people, these ministers, how to be good, how to be virtuous, how to be righteous, it seems that it's not effective. Therefore, he says that in that specific time, then this will work as the standard.
Congratulations, first of all, Jenina, for reaching this milestone, the final stage of your study. Yeah, I would also say that I think your thesis is generally clear. I think I understand what you are saying in the thesis. You are straightforward and very simple language. Really, I can understand, except for the Chinese characters, of course. Are you half Chinese?
No.
So you are full-blooded
Filipino.
Okay. That is of course a personal question, but I think it's also related with the project that you are doing. Like, for example, I have one note here that. Do you think that it is important for you to have a command of the Chinese language in order to make a claim that Shang Yang's thought suffered from a severe misreading? That is your term. No. Shang Yang's thought suffered from a severe misreading. Like, for example, Dr. Dy was saying that if you compare yourself with Mao's interpretation, so he's asking about how you compare yourself with Mao's interpretation. And of course, right now you are categorically saying that probably you are in a better position to interpret Lord Shang. By the way, Yang means Lord. That's right, Shang Yang. What is the Yang there? Sorry.
That's his name.
That is the whole name.
Lord of Shang.
So, okay, Shang Yang, sorry. I thought, because sometimes you're using Shang Yang and then Lord Shang. I thought Yang means Lord. Sorry. Anyway, my question is, since you don't have command of the Chinese language, you admit it, how come that you are so sure about your claim that there is that these Chinese scholars suffer from a severe misreading? So, do you think it is important for you as a scholar to make that statement? Do you think it's important for you to have a command of that language? That is in question for, I'm not saying that you should have a command of the Chinese language. I'm just asking, do you think, does it cross your mind when you're doing the thesis that I think before I make this claim, I think it's important for me to have a command of the language? So it's in the question form. I'm not making a statement here.
Yes po, of course, it's important. If you will be guarding jealously this discipline, then you should have not only the passion, but the capacity, the knowledge to undergo the tedious process. And so the reason, first, of course, that claim po, is derived from the multitude of recent sources that that is consistently clarifying the meaning of so it seems that yes, I am not I don't have the mastery of the knowledge of the language rather, but I enrolled po in Ateneo Confucian. Yes po. Confucius Institute too. But it's mostly conversational. So actually the language even that is being used in this reference is actually old traditional language. That's why it's really difficult to grasp the meaning, its actual meaning, regardless of whether I am a Filipino, I think, or someone who knows the language itself, because it's different from the new language versus the old traditional language.
Classical Chinese.
Yes po, classical Chinese. That's why the reason how I try to flesh out the essence or this meaning that I'm trying to push forward in my research is to really go back to the etymological meaning of the term. So that's why it's another part of research to study really the etymology, the root word, based from the characters, the ideograms.
So essentially what you are saying is that it is not necessary, it is not important for me to go back, to have a master, to have a command of that language in order to make that assertion.
Of course, sir, it's an edge that you have this as at the mastery.
But it is not necessary.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that being able to converse fluently in what we know today as the Mandarin language or presupposes that you have the grasp of the traditional classical Chinese languages.
Okay,
because these are two different ways of writing.
What you're saying is that there are alternative ways.
Yes.
And that's what you did, those alternative ways, in order for you to make that claim.
It's like Beowulf's English is different from modern English. If you read the poem Beowulf, the English there is archaic English, old English, which no ordinary Englishman would understand, no? Unless he's a scholar.
That's why also, in addition to that, I cited in my references the Chinese text language references wherein it has this is an online references of the classical books, works from Confucianism, Taoism, Mozi, but not all has the English translation, but they have the original Chinese characters. So what I did when I do my research is I tried to look for the verses from the Book of Lord Shang and vis-a-vis the electronic version of the original characters and tried to look one by one the meanings of these traditional characters. Pero pag di ko pa rin po maintindihan, if I can still understand the meaning from these traditional characters, I look for its etymological again to identify its seminal meaning based from because it's dependent to pictograms to how it is being drawn. So it's really archaic and tedious process to grasp the essence.
Okay, so now I understand the rigor that you applied in doing the research. That's why I clarify that I'm not making a judgment, rather I'm making a question. I'm asking you that. And so another thing that I want to note is, this is my suggestion, I don't know if this is okay with you, but I think there's a need for a section on, the other fields call this definition of terms. We don't call it here, but it's my suggestion for readers like me, ordinary readers. I think there's a need for a section on short description of the Chinese terms that we use. So that, yeah, parang ganun, no, yung tawag na glossary, or parang short description lang, so these are the terms, again, what you read. So that when somebody is reading your thesis and then encounter the term, they can easily go to that section where there is a short description of the Chinese terms. So it is a suggestion.
Yes. Although I think I tried to explain it in
The footnotes.
but I consider these as the recommendation to make it to have a more accessible
Yung
understanding
madali ba?
instead of looking at the
Footnotes, hahanapin mo kasi sa
Yes.
footnotes. But if you have a separate section for the terms, I think, kasi that's one of my struggles when I was reading. So I always
have to
look
go
for or to go back to the, ano nga bang ibig sabihin ng Chinese term na to? So if there is already that section, then it's easy for the readers. So that is a suggestion, you may take it, you may not take it. Another question is it not helpful as well if the Chinese characters are also explained? This I get especially from the lectures of Dr. D. For example, there is a Chinese term, he will try to dissect the different, it's because it's a logogram, diba? So, do you have a part in your thesis?
I think it's given.
Yes.
Okay,
Footnotes,
so-
sa footnote.
Yes.
I noticed that.
Okay, so I just give
My explanation.
There's an explanation.
For example, po, when I tried to explain the Confucian ideal society, so originally po there is a separate chapter to discuss fully the ideal, the Confucian ideal, but to make we decided po, my advisor decided to just cut it short and just put it in the footnote because it will be repetitive, and at the same time we don't want to make it a historical reiteration of the warring states to make it philosophical, kasi kung nagmumukha siya, it appears that it's becoming more of a historical study instead of a philosophical one. That's the reason why we try to chop it up and put it.
So I get it now. Another question is, do you agree that every political philosophy, of course you're presenting to us the Shang Yang's political philosophy, do you think that every political philosophy is somewhat anchored on a specific understanding of human nature? Do you agree with that? Yes or no? That you have a specific understanding. You have a philosophical anthropology, if you want to use the term, the philosophical term.
Yes, I think so.
So what is Shang Yang's philosophical anthropology?
His philosophical anthropology is interesting to note since he tried to call men, or instead of using man or rin, sorry, I don't have the Chinese character in my PowerPoint presentation, but instead of coming back, going back to the traditional, to the Confucian perspective, man is always referred to as rin with the rin character po. I don't know if I have it.
And Shang Yang is amenable with this interpretation.
However, Shang Yang po, instead of saying or calling it rin, calling man as rin, he referred it constantly as min or people.
Right.
That's rin.
That's the red. Okay. And then
Shang
people.
Yang, he referred to them as min. Instead of men, he called them, instead of ren, he called them min. Which is a very interesting thing to know because he actually antedate monks who tried to study the Confucian understanding of human nature, which is man is good.
Good.
Shang Yang antedated, he was born first before Nunsit. So he has this grasp of human psychology, of man. He has this understanding, he has this philosophy of human nature that coming from the character showed to us by Dr. D. Min.
Okay.
If we try to flesh out its etymological meaning, I try to explain it in the references, or in the footnote rather, that mean is derived from the original word slave.
Slave.
Okay, and so?
And slave, so a person who's going to be pricked by a pointed tool. So that's the reason why it's drawn in that fashion po. So Shang Yang having this perspective of a slave as the original meaning of mean. So it gives us the assumption that man is, he explained it in he wrote it in the book of Lord Shang, that man is selfish, man is greedy.
That is why there is parallelism with Machiavellianism.
Yes po,
Okay.
perhaps. But and
Perhaps,
also in the legalistic measures, that's the presumption that, as I've said, these philosophers will make in comparisons. It's their ideals are mostly in the speculative and the theoretical perspective, but this man, Shang Yang, was able to not only produce a theoretical framework or philosophy, but was able to employ it in his reign as Prime Minister of the state of China. So it's an effectual
Okay.
philosophy.
So the last question. Do you agree with the tenets of Shang Yang's political philosophy? No, this is do you agree?
Personally.
Personally.
Because now you're basically, of course, what you did is a scholarly, di ba, you were able to contribute to clarifying Shang Yang's political philosophy. But now my question is, do you agree, generally speaking?
But the human psychology and all the
Political philosophy.
the entirety of his
Or do you
political
espouse
philosophy.
kind of philosophy?
Or maybe a specific aspect of the political philosophy.
Um,
I don't know the mutual surveillance that you were talking about. Do you like
Yeah,
that
it has
mutual
that-
surveillance?
Yun nga po, it has this, in the very extreme sense, no, the very humanity part po na at the present condition, for example, the clamor to preserve human rights and
Yeah.
all. But first po, my original intention why I chose Shang Yang is because of these. I was really intrigued by his personality, by his philosophy. But then as I study him, parang somehow po I agree on some parts of his philosophy.
What is specific?
For instance, the psychology of the human person po, that he tried to espouse. My mom po, she's here. She works in as crime registrar, and lagi ko po tinatanong sa kanya po, sa crime registrar, so he's registering all the crimes that's happening in the city. So, do you still have this faith in humanity? Are they really good humans, or are they really good? So, yun po yung reason na somehow I'm really questioning na Shang Yang is saying something true na once it's within the family, yung the concept of love, that's the term po, instead of righteousness or of benevolence. The reason why a parent is benevolent to the son instead of Ren is because of or love, which has the selfish or the parang self-centeredness po. So there is this presupposition or standpoint na because it benefits me.
So if people are crooked, how can we trust a leader who may also be crooked?
a leader
So-
which
so-
may also be
Crooked.
Crooked.
What I mean is, look at our present society. Di ba? So kung ang tao ay kailangan pala merong strong leader, ganun din naman yung leader. So how can we trust them?
And I think we can, my question with that is could you think of a ruler in Asia that you would identify with Shang Yang?
Duterte. Gusto niyo
No, I
marinig?
don't think so. I don't think so. That's why I asked the question.
It's like
rule
a
by
benevolent
law
dictator.
and rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you made a very good clarification of the two. I think Duterte is rule of law. It's not rule of law.
He's using the laws, applying it according to his own accord.
Yes.
So first po, regarding the question, are rulers also crooked? Again, I think I mentioned it, that Shang Yang acknowledged the reality that rulers are inept, are crooked as well, or mediocre rulers. They are not capable of embodying rin or becoming the moral standard, the moral paragon. So even if, that's why he removed the distinction between a Shaolin from a Taren. We don't find this distinction between a superior man and an inferior man in Shang Yang's philosophy. So through the use of standard, the ruler, the Wang Tse, he calls it the ideal ruler for him would be the Wang Tse, someone who's able to, the true monarch who is able to unify all under heaven, not through rin, not through virtue, but the indispensable use of war po. So that's the idea of
So you would not be able to identify an ancient ruler that would embody the ideas of Shang Yang.
While I was reading this po, I see North Korean.
Yung si ano,
Oh,
dictator.
yes.
North Korean.
Not
What
necessarily.
about Singapore?
Or Singapore even.
Lee Kuan Yew.
Lee Kuan Yew po.
So it's a benevolent dictator
Yes.
dapat.
Kaya nga,
That's the
North Korean na perspective, not because of the ruler, but because of how they, for us, no, not coming from their culture, we think that they are brainwashing their people and all. But for Shang Yang, that's one way of maintaining the simplicity of the mean, to allow them to be simple, to maintain that innate nature. Because if you maintain that nature of the mean, then they will not repel or question the ideologies of the state. That's why it has this totalitarian facade because of that agenda po. But as a ruler, Lee Kuan Yew, of course po, his sincerity with how we use the law, instead of making it, using it for his own benefit or oppressing the people because he has power. The ruler is also guarded by that standard. He's also under the standard or the aegis of Fa. That's why he can abuse his power as well.
Is there an end to this fact? Or is it a process of continuous reformation until where?
Is there an end in Fa? I think this is a
Continuous
continuous reformation, because the methods or the measures of this generation will not be, from the perspective of Shang Yang, will not be applicable to
So when
the
can we
next
say,
generation.
then that we have reached this part of reforming society, so we have to move to the next level?
When I think the condition is no longer, or the laws again, or Fa again, is no longer beneficial in the progress of that society in an ideal sense.
So it's the people who are going to reform society.
Not necessarily the people, sir, but the leader of that generation, the ruler of that generation. Again, Shang Yang has this distrust among the people and also to the leader. But since you are the leader of this generation, you're the ruler of this generation, and it's apparent that there is chaos in your society, then I think it's a sign that you have to change, that you have to reform, that you have to that you have to apply a new way of governing the people in order to unify them, or to avoid that corruption.
Okay na? So can we ask Jenina to leave the room and the rest also? So the panel can deliberate.